south of the border.
Are you one of the millions caught up in that first world rat race? Well, I used to be. I'm John Mueller, host of the Expat Files, where we discuss what it's really like to live, work, play, and or retire down in Latin America. Can you really live like a king down here on a crummy Social Security check? What about starting a business, or buying a house, or love and romance? Just tune in Monday and Wednesday at 8 p.m. and send me an email, theexpatfiles@gmail.com. And to listen to any of my past shows, just go to progressiveradionetwork.com/archives and click on the link to the Expat Files. Nos vemos.
I kiss the smile upon her face.
This is Dr. Vicky. I'm so excited to be on progressiveradionetwork.com. I'll be able to talk to you live, answer your questions, and work with you for your own patient rights. Tune in every Sunday at 5 p.m. progressiveradionetwork.com. See you on Sunday, 5 p.m.
Did you miss your favorite show on Progressive Radio Network? Go to progressiveradionetwork.com anytime, day or night for all of our great shows. Don't be left out and miss important shows and information. Visit progressiveradionetwork.com and be in the loop. Progressive Radio Network, your number one source for all things progressive.
Hello and welcome back to A Better World. Thank you, Mozart. What a way to open up. It always touches my heart. Welcome, everyone, back to A Better World. This is your host, Mitchell J. Rabin, and I'm very glad you're joining us again today. We're going to have another very interesting show, actually, with a guest who, for me, is a consummate A Better World guest. Quintessential, actually, Jean Houston, who will be with us momentarily. Jean has a distinguished career, which we'll get to in a moment. But first, I want to just remind you all, anyone who is on the eastern seaboard of New York, or even the West Coast, that's how I feel about Swami Beyond Ananda. Swamiji will be in New York City at the Meta Center, sponsored by A Better World, by the Meta Center, and by New Realities on Wednesday, June 15th. This is an event you do not want to miss. He is funny. He is wise. He combines the two with the sensibility of a Borscht Belt comedian mixed with a holy man from India. If you can imagine that, then you'll want to be there. And if you can't imagine it, you ought to be there. So go to our website at www.abetterworld.net, www.abetterworld.net, where under events, where you can gain information and you can contact the Meta Center. I also told everyone that there will be a raffle. I've been told that for anyone interested in a magic carpet ride on Swami Beyond Ananda's special magic carpet, on which he will be arriving in New York on June 15th, Well, the first 100 people who sign up will have an opportunity to join the raffle. That doesn't guarantee a ride, not on the carpet, but it definitely guarantees a ride in person with him. It is and will be a joyride. So please do join us. It's a special event. He rarely comes back to New York. He's originally a nice Jewish boy from Brooklyn, and he's gone out to make it big on the West Coast. So we're glad to have him back. A couple of words while we're waiting to get Gene on the line is this. First and foremost, just to let you know that Gene Houston is currently working with a very interesting group called Evolving Wisdom. It's the fastest growing global e-learning company, and it's dedicated to transformational education. And the website, www.destinyandyou.com, destinyandyou.com, is a place where you can go and hear a 75-minute free audio about what this work will be, what the teleseminar will consist of over the course of the next some 7 or so weeks, all taught by, led by Gene Houston. Now, a word or two about Gene, and that is she is known as a high-level scholar, philosopher, and author of some 26 books, is one of the foremost visionary thinkers and doers of our time. And doer is a very important piece here because these days there are a lot of beers who have such spiritual status as she, and few have actually translated that into doing, which is one of the reasons I am so happy about having her on the show to talk about the translation of high-minded, big-hearted spiritual values, which we speak about on A Better World all the time, whether it's radio or TV, how to translate our humanistic, our humanitarian, our environmentally sensitive, deep wisdom values into action, because God knows that's where it's most needed. And as such, being who she is, she has been one of the principal founders of the Human Potential Movement. A powerful and dynamic speaker, she has served as a consultant to several agencies of the UN, including UNICEF and the United Nations Development Program. She's worked in over 100 countries, training leadership at every level and bringing skills to the grassroots level. And that's what she does. She is a Taurus. She understands the relationship fundamentally of heaven and earth, of translating ideal and idea into action, into manifestation, which is really the essence in large part of Destiny and You, which is really a reflection of her life. Sound familiar? You're getting it. As I mentioned, this work she's doing now called The 3 Keys to Discovering and Living Your True Purpose is available at that website, destinyandyou.com. I met Jean originally, besides through her writing, at one of the mystery school gatherings that took place, I believe it was Port Jervis, New York, several years ago. And I was invited by one of her students, who's a good friend of mine, Jim Roby, to attend and to have dinner with her. And it was a real pleasure and honor. She's been such a favorite of mine for so long, and I've known some of her students over the course of time. And to just be in her presence of speaking from ancient Greek to Latin to French to Italian like it was one seamless flow. Well, how do you reach the heart of Mitchell Rabin? That's one of the ways. And of course, another one is food and beauty. And I'm having some fun here, but nothing impresses me more than the love I feel from someone's heart and the quick wit and wisdom that comes from their mouth. And when people have both combined, we're really talking about alchemical dynamism. So on that note, we will be bringing Jean on momentarily. And until then, I'll just continue on in this vein of, how do I say, One of the impulses I have felt toward the work that Jean Houston has manifested over the years, and she's been held in such high esteem by so many, if you go to her website, you will see that the likes of Deepak Chopra and Hillary and Bill Clinton, to whom she was an advisor when they were in the White House, other members of United Nations at very high levels, have had just the finest comments to make about Dr. Jean Houston because she is a woman in service. She has taken her brilliant intellect, she has taken her deep, caring heart, and she has translated these into very practical ways of making a difference in the world. She understands, as did her good friend Margaret Mead, who I also had a chance to meet back in 1972 at an anthropology conference in Toronto, to understand the importance of having a life that is dedicated to being of service to others. And that this is where we get a fundamental nourishment, actually beyond food. I know that in my practice as a therapist over the course of years, stress management consultant and acupuncturist, when people tell me that they are seeing benefit from our dialogue, from the conversation, from sometimes what was the implementation of needles, and more recently, the use of energy medical systems, vibrational healing more accurately, called the Life System, which I now use, a biofeedback device. The look of happiness on their face, that radiance, is something that feeds me and would feed all of us. When you help somebody, it could be even opening the door for an older man or woman. And if they look at you, that exchange of eyes at that moment is a gift. And I say it's actually a form of spiritual nourishment. Now take that and multiply it out so that you have an entire village or an entire community of people that you would be helping when you align your heart with your passion, with your interests, and put them together. And on Progressive Radio Network, you will actually see this modeled by a number of our hosts here, most of whom, I would really say, is Gary Null, who is also an example of someone who has taken his ideals, his values, his caring about people, his caring about health for himself, for his family, and then expanded outward to the larger human family. And he's dedicated his life, and he has aligned the universe, really, behind that commitment and dedication. It's an interesting thing that when you have a feeling for wanting to assist the world in some way or another, whatever way that may be, and you really sit with it and digest who you want to be and start to make yourself that, because that's what we're given to do, and you commit to that kind of fulfillment, not knowing how it's going to happen, just making that commitment, the universe, as it is said, aligns behind you. Well, I won't reveal exactly this moment how that happens, but it does happen. And many of us have experienced it. I would actually say all. But the problem can be that our subconscious programming, our subconscious mind, has one agenda that it's throwing out, projecting into the universe, and our conscious mind has yet another. So there is an inner competition, an inner conflict, an inner war after a fashion. And who will win? So when we cleanse our subconscious by identifying first what's in it, what is populating it, keep what's good, and let go of what is not in alignment with our conscious self, our conscious higher mind, if you will, our higher nature, we can begin to align the various parts, as Mr. George Ivanovich Gurdjieff talked about, our three brains, our heart, our emotions, our feeling life, our mind is our intellect, and our body, into one unified field. And that is what produces harmony. The name of his school was the School for the Harmonious Development of Man, and this is what harmony means. When we form a chord and we play something that is melodious, that is even deeper, harmonious, inside ourselves, we become that unified being and field to make a difference in the world. Without that field, actually, we'll become distracted, we could become confused, we can become diverted. So having that fundamental base to what it is we're doing and who we are at base of being, then that translates into the action of doing. This is Mitchell J. Rabin for A Better World on Progressive Radio Network, and we are awaiting Jean Houston's arrival. And I spoke with her just a wee bit ago, so I know she is comfortably ensconced in her wonderful home in Ashland, where I was teaching myself a few years ago, and she invited me to her home to do an interview, which we did in her living room, which is best described as something like either the Cairo or the British Museum because of all of her anthropological and indigenous interests which populate the living room. So you get, without cover charge, you get to visit the living room and have a little visit with Jean Houston, which we did, and we will be airing that show actually soon. Jean, are you on the line?
Hi there, Mitchell.
Excellent. Hi, Jean. How are you?
Pretty good.
Good. Good to have you.
Thank you. I hear you describing my living room.
That's right. What a moment to enter on. You know, we were talking about the feng shui of Jean Houston's living room, which looks
my father once described it as a cross between a museum and an explosion in a paint factory.
Jackson Pollock. Well, I was going between the British Museum and the Cairo Museum. So anyway, welcome, and so glad to have you on today.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, I had spent the last 10 or 15 minutes or so sort of elaborating on your wondrous modeling life, if you will, Jean, as a person who has just so earned my respect over the course of actually decades about which I've known your work. And I had such pleasure meeting you some years ago at the Mystery School in Port Jervis. And that's but one thread of the many that you've been weaving into this incredible tapestry called your life. And that's probably an interesting way or analogy to make relative to the work you're doing now with Destiny and You. Could you speak a little bit about what that is? Please know I've told them everything about you.
Oh, you want to know everything about me?
No, I said I've already told everybody everything about you.
Well, Destiny and You is a 7-week program, which I'm doing with the evolutionary wisdom people. So they can find out about evolution at destinyandYou.com, in which I evoke in these 7 75-minute sessions people's capacities because one of the reasons that people don't see the higher destiny or live out of you're calling from New York, schlock destiny, or much lesser destiny, nebbish destiny, if you will, is because
you haven't forgot your Yiddish roots. I'm glad.
Yes, well, I'm not Jewish, but I might as well be.
I know that.
Show business.
Yeah.
But what we find is that people have a very narrow view of their capacities and of their reality, which actually comes out of the circumstances of conditioning, social conditioning, spiritual conditioning, all manner. I was describing earlier to someone how so many people who are leaders, and I've worked with some of the top leaders of the world all over, and I find that too many of them are trained to be white males of the year 1926. They simply have not been trained for the complexity of today's era.
Yes.
And so I've taken it on as a mission since as long as I can remember, to remind people of the depth that they contain. We not only live in the universe, Mitchell, the universe lives in us. And we have access in this extraordinarily over-endowed body-mind system to all manner of capacities for thinking in different ways, thinking in words, thinking in images, thinking with the whole body, capacities to tap into the many, many different selves that we have within us, each self often bringing with it another order of capacities and skills, capacities to use time differently, capacities to discover that beneath the surface crust of consciousness, every one of us has access to an enormous amount of creativity.
Indeed.
Capacities to reloom, to restructure the body, to heal, to enter into states in which we discover that indeed we are citizens in a universe larger than our aspiration and much more complex than all our dreams. So purposeanddestiny.com.
Yes.
That 7-week course is one where I train people every week in the use of these capacities and then extend their vision of themselves and their, what I'm calling, their second or higher destiny.
What I would say, Jean, and please correct me if this isn't a correct understanding, but I think it is, that one of the gifts that you bring forward is integrating the right and the left hemispheres as well as all sensory systems. What I was listening to in one of the 75-minute segments is that you know how to bring up the sensory information of olfactory, of visual, of auditory, and of course kinesthetic into one beautiful weave so that the memory systems of one's sense of purpose, of one's sense of delight, gets memorized, if you will, cellularly and somatically as well as intellectually.
Well, you're right. We try to cook on all burners.
Yes, beautiful.
And so, for example, we may train a person to not only think in images and think in words, but also to think with all the senses. We know that our mind, our brain system is patterned literally all over the body, and there's ways of evoking all kinds of not only memory but acuity to the environment by extending what we call the sensory field all over. When I have studied people who are high-level creatives, meaning they have sustained creativity over many years, and as you may know, I've had work with me as my research subjects, Margaret Mead for 6 years, Joseph Campbell off and on for 20 years, Buckminster Fuller, Jonas Salk, I mean, people like that, and a lot of people whose names one would not know, but who have sustained this incredible creativity. The one thing they had in common was access to these interior realities, these inner senses, and they were spelunkers in the caves of their own creativity. They were archaeologists of their own minds.
Yes.
So they could drop in an idea, say, and the idea would constellate with all kinds of images, and before you know it, they would have generally a fairly reasonable solution. You know?
Yes, indeed. They sure
we
all
live
did.
out of a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of who we are and what we contain. It's like we're sitting in a vast garden with all kinds of fruits and vegetables, and we insist on eating just the bugs on the ground.
Oh, my God, yes, exactly. And, you know, they say that we use, 5% of our brain system. But, I say that's actually incorrect because our brain system, our neurology and neural net capacity is infinite. So how do you measure?
Yes, it is.
How do you measure
5%?
How do you measure a percentage of
studies in the 1940s?
Indeed, but I think
that it is actually far, 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 far more than
far beyond exactly. So how do you measure a percentage of the infinite?
You don't.
Exactly.
And one of the things that a friend of mine said recently, my friend Deepak Chopra, is that we have all kinds of possibilities, but after you get beyond those, the possibilities are infinite. I mean, we have barely begun to use our humanity.
Yes.
And part of the reason was that for so many years, what were we doing? We were trying to keep our metabolism going.
Exactly.
Or we lived our name was Weaver. We lived in Weaver Lane. Our parents and grandparents back to goodness knows when were weavers, and so would our children be. We knew what to tell the children. We knew how life worked.
Yes.
We knew how to punish the criminals. We knew what to say. And it was a small and narrow, but in some ways psychologically a more comforting existence.
As Pete
and
Seeger called it,
anymore.
Pete Seeger
we
called it.
don't know what to tell the children.
Yeah, exactly. Pete Seeger called it little boxes. In that song, it's that idea.
Yes, that's a beautiful song. Yeah.
Right? It's like everybody is in their little box. And now you're right. We don't know what to tell anybody because the prisons in California, for instance, are absolutely exploding. We, as the freest nation on earth, so-called, have more people in our penal system than any other nation on earth. The statistics go to show how confused we really are. And you offer through your work, I would say your life really embodies this, is this trajectory, Gene, of aggregating your resources, marshaling them in such a way that you keep showing up, making a huge difference on so many levels in people's lives. Do you think that that is our driving force as humans?
Well, I think that a lot of people are rising to what we can only call the lure of becoming.
Beautiful.
I mean, this is certainly the most different and challenging time in human history. I mean, other times thought they were it. They're wrong. This is it.
Yes. Yes.
Because what we do or do not do will determine the next 100 years whether we grow or die as a species.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that since we are Earth beings, since we are person planets, it may be, and then we are grown out of Earth stuff. It could be that the anima mundi, the soul of the world, if you will, to use a metaphor, has risen in us and said, it's time to get on with it. It's in the hound of heaven goes rough, rah, 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 at our feet in the morning saying, get on with it. So a lot of people feel both exhilaration and despair. Sometimes in equal amounts, because they know that they have been born into the time in which we are either the stewards or we are the destroyers of this world. And so people feel it as a kind of strange yearning for they know not what. What I try to do with these purpose and destiny types of courses is really give them clarification as to what they're being asked to do and to be, and more importantly, how to gain the capacities to actually go out and do and be all that.
This raises a question that I'm sure you've been asked a million times, because the whole subject begs the question, how do I actually earn a living? How do I pay my rent while simply following, as our dear friend Joseph Campbell would say, my bliss? How is it possible to reconcile? Now, surely in the little boxes scenario, it was always separated out. You did whatever you did for work, and then you came home and you had your Leave It to Beaver family. But now these days, there's a wonderful unifying of these elements. But there's still the practical question, Gene. How do I bring these together under one roof?
Well, I think when you've just put your finger on it, you've used the words under one roof. I don't know that we do.
Yes.
I think that we have many roofs. The old biblical adage, I think it's is it in John, in my Father's house there are many mansions.
Yes.
In the cosmos of the psyche, there are many rooms, there are many opportunities. What happens is that in thinking of ourselves as encapsulated bags of skin dragging around dreary little egos, we have lost the largesse, what my Sicilian grandmother referred to as abundanza.
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 Abundance for all.
Which is there in the human psyche. And thus we shut off from opportunities. What I have found in my work, for the most part, is that, not in every case, but in a great many of them, is that when people enter into this abundanza of spirit, and at the same time are doing something to increase the amplitude of who and what they are at every level, sensory and physical, psychological, mythic and symbolic and spiritual, then they just have more hooks and eyes on reality, and as well as the synchronous aspects of the synchronicities of destiny seem to come toward them.
Yes.
And I have seen this happen so often that clearly there is something here that is not paranormal, but is rather part and parcel of the way the universe works.
Indeed. You know, just before you came on, I was saying that when someone makes a commitment to their higher nature's expression, let's say in a vocation, which you and I, of course, know comes from vocare, from the Latin, to call or to be called, and someone actually listens to that and responds, the universe will line up behind us. But what I didn't say is that we are actually the universe.
We are the universe. We not only live in the universe lives in us.
Exactly.
And that is, I mean, this whole cosmological shift that has happened just in the last 20 or 30 years, of which the Hubble telescopes have been very helpful.
Yes.
And we realize that we are cosmic beings. I mean, we are the latest metabolism of the product of the metabolism of the galaxy.
Yes.
The way that fission and fusion exists in stars also exists in our right and left hemisphere of our brain.
Very true.
We are fractals of the universe in miniature, except that the miniature, the very fact that we are so infinitely small, and actually we are not. I mean, a sun is 10 to the 27 times larger than a human being. An atom is 10 to the 28 times smaller than a human being. We are there, right there, smack in the middle.
Smack in the middle, exactly.
And we also contain, in the depth structures of our minds, we contain the access points to this larger reality. So that when we start talking about spiritual reality, it is not exactly the same as what we thought of as before. It is that plus much, much more. It is also the fact that in different states of consciousness and availability, we can tap into the universe at large.
Indeed.
And you know, I've just studied too many highly creative people. I remember one who was a major scientist at the Rockefeller Foundation, the Rockefeller Institute, and he said, when I was he was exploring the way he thought, he said, you know, when I have my science, I'm a good scientist, but when I get inside to myself, it is as if, and I'm exploring a scientific premise, he says, it's like I'm in the warehouse of God. He said, the things come up that I know about, and then something so very different that it seems so way beyond anything that I knew before.
That's
so you see, he indeed had this level of access.
Exactly. That's so important. Let me let everyone know that you are listening to Mitchell J. Rabin on A Better World on Progressive Radio Network, and our guest today for the hour is Dr. Jean Houston, and we are discussing what it is to get in touch with one's higher self / deeper nature. Interestingly, they are the same, one and the same thing, and the work that she is currently doing on evolving wisdom, which is a transformative education, transformational, I think would be the better word, wisdom online format in something called Destiny and You. And if you were to go to www.destinyandYou.com, you can learn about this cutting-edge material that Jean, after the course of decades, has been aggregating, putting together. And you used a word recently, I think, called mush, which is a fabulous technical term which describes the way the right and left hemispheres enjoy each other. And you also used another word which I think comes from Aristotle, of enteliki, which also describes why don't you describe it?
Well, enteliki is an ancient Greek word. It is the enteliki of an acorn to be an oak tree.
Yes.
It is the enteliki of a popcorn kernel to be a fully popped entity. It's the enteliki of a baby to be a grown-up human being.
It's inchoate, if you will.
To be
right.
Much, much more than we ever suspected. It means the dynamic, purposeful, evolutionary pattern that we almost everyone has. In part of my work, I actually show people ways of getting in touch with this enteliki. And what happens is that there is then, if they're serious about it, then there is the activation of all kinds of potentials and synchronicities that seem to follow. It's as if the universe says, hey, there's a live one.
Exactly.
Let's follow them around.
Exactly.
And also, I think, Mitchell, something that I've rarely talked about publicly, and that is one of the things that I've discovered in all of my work is that there's no question, but there are optimal templates optimal patterns for us, for ourselves, physically, psychologically, mentally, in so many different ways. And that part of getting in touch with Inteligi is also, as an extension, it is in touch with the optimal body, the optimal mind, the optimal, just all these different capacities.
Indeed.
So that it is as if we are the fetuses of our higher selves. And
beautifully put.
And that's something else that I try to do in my works, to show that you, in point of fact, you are the fetus of this higher self.
In other words, I think you're really inviting us all, Jean, to grow up.
Oh, we have to grow up.
Let's go beyond the fetus.
Yeah. That's right. Well, that's why I've said in one of my books, Jump Time, it's jump time.
Yes, exactly.
We are jumping to a whole new dispensation of what it means to be human. And if we don't do it, we're going to be out of here in about 150 years.
Exactly. It's happening quickly. That's why the name of the book that I am currently writing is called Creating a Better World Quickly! And,
tell me what you have in mind in terms of the acceleration of making a better world.
Well, I think it has a lot really to do with mind. It has more to do with mind and the fixed ideas that we are carrying around, Jean, than perhaps anything else. The limitations with which we live are really our hell. And I believe that it is our heaven to break through those limited fixed ideas. Many years ago, I studied Tai Chi Chuan with a nice Jewish guy from Long Island who was trained by Professor Cheng Man-ching, who was Chiang Kai-shek's personal physician down in New York's Chinatown on the Bowery. And he used to say that if there were a devil, it was the fixed mind. And I believe that it is up to us to step beyond, out of that little box that Pete Seeger talked to us about, and out of that box, and maybe even out of that box, quite honestly, and take a look at ourselves from above. And that's the power of imagination, which I have said over and again is our true divine gift from God, is the use and utilization of that imagination. And if we were to do that, we can see how limited, like you were saying before, the little box into which we painted ourselves. It's a veritable corner. And given a moment's chance, we would stop being dehydrated, if you will, in that little corner and step out and really play as humans and fulfill this higher mission that I think we all feel in our hearts and souls, but we have to let ourselves feel it, think it, and breathe it. And when we do that, that is the base, I would say. In the book, I review a lot of different areas of our lives, a lot of corners, if you will, where we are living through assumptions, belief systems that are so limiting, so narrow, have so minor scope relative to what is potential. And I have you to thank, I must say, for a lot of the thinking that has really imbued me over the years, having to do with the whole, just the concept of human potential. Just that phrasing I find inspiring, because it already pulls us out of the box, like, oh, there's potential? There's more than what my parents told me, what my government tells me, what my TV box tells me, on and on. I'm being a little funny about it, but you know what I mean. And you have actually inspired people for so many decades along this line of people getting a taste, a hint of something more than this humdrum workaday, bee's nest kind, beehive kind of life. And as you also said, we are being called now like never before, because our veritable existence or extinction is at risk, literally at stake. So I use this radio show, I use my TV show, I use my newsletter, my blogging on Huffington Post, and the books that are soon to come, including another called Awakening the Soul to Action that we spoke about earlier, which all has to do with aligning to the soul's purpose for making a difference in this world at this critical moment. So in a nutshell, that's what I would say to you.
Wonderful. Do you make your living doing this?
I'm a psychotherapist. I'm a holistically oriented psychotherapist, and I don't get paid anything for the work I do in media.
Yeah, nobody does.
Yeah, no, this is all a labor of love, and
It
actually,
is a labor of love,
it
yeah.
is the alignment of purpose that we are speaking of just now. You know,
And you were trained in New York?
Yes. I was trained in New York City and in Keene, New Hampshire. I went to Antioch Graduate School in Clinical and Counseling Psychology.
That was a wonderful program.
And I went to the Tri-State Institute of Traditional Chinese Acupuncture. So I am actually and this is one of the reasons that I have, on the train up here, I was contemplating you, and I realized that one of the reasons I think I feel so connected to you is that you are in many respects my anima. To go back to our dear beloved Carl Jung.
Carl Jung, indeed.
Understood that relationship of the masculine and the feminine aspects of ourselves and what we see in each other projected in the opposite sex. And so, not just that we are both Tauruses separated by just a couple of days, but I feel that I look at your life and what you have done with writing, with the UN, with teaching, with advising, with leading a life that I consider, if I may really say, publicly exemplary for the kind of potential that we all have as humans. Your understanding of language and appreciation of that, theater and humor, all of these come together in a magical moment, if you will, of the life of Jean Houston, and I admire you.
You know, you're so kind, Mitchell, but one of the things, and this is a question to you, one of the things that I've noticed in my life, and in so many lives, that there is a fractal of return, a fractal of similarity. Now, fractal, of course, we know what fractals are, patterns of similarity and repetition.
A micro-macro relationship.
You see patterns of repetition. If you look at a cauliflower, you see the little florelet, and it looks very much like the whole cauliflower.
Indeed.
If you look at a coastline, you have the big coastline, but then you find the fractal repetitions in the sand, where the wave, creates the little wave eddies.
Indeed.
And then
it's the micro-macro relationship, if you will.
Yes, the macro-micro, but there is this extraordinary form of asymmetrical symmetry, if you will, where it's not exactly the same, but it's a pattern of repetition. Now, I believe that this is true in time as well.
Yes.
So, for example, you're describing my life. If I look at my life, there is a definite pattern of repetition, a fractal. I am Scotch Sicilian with a little bit of Cherokee. So that was already a strangeness.
A uniqueness, Jean.
Well, yeah, but then I also traveled to 20 schools before I was 12 because Dad was writing the Bob Hope Show. So I had that internationalism, and then schools, international types of schools, and I work all over the world in 107 countries. And when I was 20, I had the first legal access to LSD with the government research, 22 I guess it was, studying all the different continents within the human psyche, and then that ended and we created, my husband and I, non-drug studies of the depths and the continents within ourselves, on and on and on and on and on. So it's always a pattern that has to do with multiculturalism, you see.
Yes.
And of course, I'm called upon to. Right now I'm working in Japan, helping them discover some of the basis of a new emerging civilization out of the terrible trauma that they're in. I'm working with Arabic women in the Middle East to empower them to create some of the divine designs and strategies for the new governments that are emerging, and on and on and on. I'm in Zambia and I'm in Nepal and all of that. This is a part of the fractal of my whole life.
Yes.
Now, I find that when I follow the fractal and say yes to it, my life blooms. When I say no for one reason or other, it stops. It just stops.
Interesting.
Now, and so one of the things that I've been showing people of how to detect these great designs in their life that they may not have been aware of, it's also part of their Inteligi, the fractal patterns of creation that activate the deeper purpose of destiny. For example, if I were to say to you, Mitchell, what is your fractal? Have you ever determined it?
I would say that, if I were to put it into language, Jean, that I am designed to teach, to share, to communicate. I pour my heart out and through language, the spoken and written words.
And was this true as a boy, as a young boy?
Yes. I started writing actually when I was about 4 or 5 years old, and I started writing about China, about which I knew nothing. And I was raised as a nice cultural Jew in Forest Hills. And everything that came of my life and international travel, etc., and my deep relationship with Chinese philosophy and wisdom, later Vedic Indian wisdom, Tibetan, and on, came through, interestingly, nothing in my family but my own inner discoveries and openings. I feel like as I was listening to you speak, my ear was opening to this idea that I kept saying yes to, and it led to my own inner discoveries, also in some part through the use, not legally at the time, of LSD, but what became ripened into the sacred use of plant medicine, which also became another dimension of my own learning. But I feel internally that my life's passion has to do with taking ideas and bringing them to be of service to the world in a very practical, down-to-earth, grassroots way on an international level.
And are you working internationally now?
Yes. I've moved into an interesting domain that is very different than any of my background, which has to do, of course, with health and healing and psychology and writing and, well, what you refer to as social artistry, which I think is a brilliant phrase, by the way, but a smaller, much smaller capacity than you. But I have been dealing with the United Nations and the NGO community probably since the early 90s. I've spoken at the Enlightenment Society several times, and I have a deep relationship with the UN, which is right up the block from where I live. I have moved in, though, Gene, into the area of green technology and energy efficiency as a way of regrounding different societies on a renewable energy sustainable basis. Because I think I'm a great fan and lover of Nikola Tesla. And I feel, yes, I'm sure. And he outlined many of the blueprints that had we used back then when J.P. Morgan decided to pull his funding. And if he had let that evolve, I think we would have a different world today.
A very different world, indeed.
And as you know, you're friends
Tesla
with...
would not have spent his last days with one friend, a pigeon who flew through his window.
At the New Yorker Hotel, exactly. And your friend, Buckminster Fuller, was another one full of this kind of spirit and life and technical knowledge that was helping to advance the world also at a very early stage in our 20th century. So,
I live in my house in Ashland, Oregon.
Yes, I do.
Where I am now. Is double dome. It was designed by Bucky Fuller. It was the last thing he ever did before he died.
Yes, you told me that when I was there.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
That's
right.
Fabulous. Yeah. So I have taken an interesting route. I remain the educator. I remain the promoter. I remain playing the roles that I play in life, but I have now embraced this domain of green technology and the upgrading of business to drop this reptilian, brainstem-based kind of thinking and move on into the acknowledgement of, dare I call it, a neocortex, and that we can have a business model that is also related to compassion, understanding, and true service, and be highly profitable, by the way. So I feel that I'm moving my kind of intelligence and creativity, if you will, into that direction of upgrading business. I keep saying, Gene, that it is business that has, and the corporate mindset that has brought us to this brink of hell, and it will be that same transformation of mind and context that will bring us back toward our true inheritance, which I think is heaven.
Well, it's very interesting how what we sometimes think of as the shadowed qualities, both in our personal lives and in our social lives, are often the things that are sitting on top of what is our highest quality. So, for example, I have a series of exercises where I call forth people to discuss, or just to say very briefly what is their worst quality. And I find that there are certain very interesting things. For example, let's say that their worst quality is anger. And yet when I look at them deeply, I sort of let go of Gene and I become pure litmus paper. For who they
yes.
are. What I find is that in many, not all, but in most cases, their deeper quality is that they have it's almost like an artist's palette of multiple colors of emotion. Subtle colors, strong colors, bold colors, jagged, a great palette of emotional complexity. But the society that they're in has not allowed for that subtle and exquisite expression of these great varieties and range and templates of feeling. So it gets repressed, and then it explodes as anger. And so that, for example, in my discovery of angry people, when they begin to focus on this incredible palette of emotional genius that they have, then they find that the anger doesn't exactly go away, but it diminishes accordingly.
Yes.
Similarly, people who are, well, let's just say, procrastinators. And when I look at them, again, from this depth level, I discover that what they really have in their inner genius is a capacity for deep timing, for knowing the things, the kairos, the loaded time of when things have to happen.
Yes.
But because we live in a clocked society, in such a linear time, that it gets repressed, and it just and something in them refuses to act, and they become procrastinators. When we get into their sense of the deeper purposes of time and the importance of time events, then they don't procrastinate anymore.
That's very interesting. So what you're seeing and what you're uncovering is the inherent intelligence of the procrastination. And rather than being a negative, the way it's really construed in our linear society, our clock mind, you have uncovered this deeper level of relationship to time, which also has inside it patience, always considered a virtue.
Very much so. I mean, I use myself as an exemplum horriblum. When I look at my worst quality,
funny. Yes.
it would be hypersensitivity. I was a 7-month baby.
Oh.
I mean, I was very, very tiny when I was born, which means that I'm unfinished, because when you're 7 months, the myelin sheath and all kinds of things never get properly put in, for the most part. So you are, as I tell people, what they see in front of them when I'm there with them is the world's oldest and largest living fetus, and completely incomplete. But what it did is, though it gave me extreme hypersensitivity, I mean, you can drop a pin and I can feel it through my whole body. And, of course, being a public person, you can imagine you're often the vehicle for all kinds of projections, which is no fun at all.
Exactly, you become a pincushion.
So what I had, then realizing what was going on, I would say, wait a minute. This is actually the basis for my highest quality, which is radical empathy. Radical empathy for people, for things, for ideas, which has allowed me to do the work that I have to do. So that's one thing I'm going to suggest, and something I'm also exploring in this course, is that everyone has, from their shadowed qualities, they actually have access through the shadowed qualities to their highest quality. And it's a question of where they decide to put their attention is what will make a difference between an extraordinary life and a life of feeling very unhappy about themselves.
Quiet desperation.
Yes.
Yes, indeed. No, that's beautiful. What you're, in a sense, saying, just to be not pat, but from vice to virtue. This idea that in the shadow, that thing that we think of as our weakest link, our weakest part, actually has virtue contained inside it.
Very much so.
And your course helps to bring that forward. That's actually an incredible act of love, because it shows the inclusivity. One of the things I just wrote about, as I think you saw in my newsletter, is this notion, and when I was describing you and me, if you will, is an integrative nature, a true holistic. The word holistic is bandied about these days rather, I think, recklessly. And people aren't getting it. What it really is everything you're referring to, Gene, when you refer to the fractal nature of the universe. And we are one dynamic part, both in the larger and the smaller. We are in between that bacteria or atom and the stars above. We're playing that role in the middle of man and woman on earth, between heaven and earth. And I just think it's so important for people to get that we are a true, living, vital part of the whole. And everyone, by the way, is included.
Now, when you can actually understand that viscerally.
Yes.
And not just intellectually. Intellectually, it's an easy, difficult concept.
Yes.
Viscerally, it's a very difficult one, because
True.
What you are doing is you are transcending the conditioning, not just of your culture, but of millennia, of thinking of ourselves as, separate from. I mean, that's not true of many indigenous people I've worked with, but for the most part, most people, it is. So this is a very large order. And it's one that I work with in this course, as well as my mystery school and all my other courses. And that is how to really move beyond this conditioning of centuries and realize that you are the universe totally in miniature, but with access to the same functions and realities of that universe.
Yes, beautifully put. Beautiful
and that's something I go into in the course that follows it, which is a 12-week advanced course, where I look at the powers of the universe: centration, allurement, homeostasis, cataclysm, synergy, radiance, all these powers that are there as part of our universal reality, and how we find them within ourselves, and in finding them within ourselves, how they begin to bring us to this other order of a new humanity.
Oh, that's beautiful. I want to come around. We have just a couple of minutes left, but I want to come back to something I asked you earlier in a very practical way. We live within a certain socioeconomic context, of course. It's not in West Africa. It's not in Nepal. It's right here. And we need to earn these things called shekels, dollars. And what do we do when we have a heart urge to move in a certain direction, or someone takes your course and they get in touch with that deeper nature of their own and feel inspired to move in that direction? And they also have a bill to pay for rent the following month. Does your course address that nitty-gritty reality?
A little bit, yes, and when I deal with abundance. You see, when you're cooking on more burners,
va bene.
When you're cooking on more burners, you tend to have more enthusiasm, and you have more awareness of opportunity. And this is a funny thing to say, opportunity has more awareness of you. I know so many people who go through life saying, nothing ever happens, nothing ever happens, nothing ever happens, and the universe is going, hey there,
over here.
Nothing ever happens.
Right.
But what happens in these kinds of courses is that you recognize that you are in a living universe that is yearning for you, that is really very interested in you, and you begin to take action and respond.
Yes.
And then you seem to have a passion for the possible, to sustain and to follow through on things.
Indeed. That is a beautiful point.
It's just like you talked about, the visceral shift into knowing that we are the universe, and the visceral shift into realizing that there really is an abundant universe, but it does require that, that flicking on of the life of this higher order of understanding in ourselves for us to really create this. We are walking magnets, and there is no question about that.
Yes, indeed.
And we do attract, both consciously and certainly unconsciously, the things that we get. When I study people's moods and the way they make choices as to their moods, and a kind of strange, bittersweet, semi-erotic desire to fail.
Yes,
people.
Right.
And that's their subconscious, which is hugely strong, and will then attract just that kind of If not failure, then same old, a life of serial monotony.
Yes, exactly. Well, listen, on the contrary to that, you have been living an exemplary life and making a huge contribution to this planet, and for which I thank you. And I'll tell you, I don't know what it's going to look like. I don't know when it's going to happen, but to whatever extent I can work with you in some collaborative capacity. Believe me, it would be something I would really love to do.
Well, let's talk about that sometime.
Okay. I would love to.
Not on the show, but
not on the show.
privately,
Not on the show, exactly.
That.
And also, when you're in New York, I would like to invite you into the studio here at Progressive Radio Network, run by Gary Null, your brother's old friend. And
my brother's friend, yeah.
Yes, and it would be really delightful to have you.
All right.
Let's give your website out one more time for this good work that you're doing. It is www.destinyandyou.com.
That's for this 7-week course, yes. And if anybody's interested in the other things that I offer, just go to GeneHouston.com.
Wonderful.
Houston spelled as in Texas.
Gene, and you are part Texan, aren't you?
Well, my great-great-great-grandfather was Sam Houston, so that sort of... and my father was from Texas.
There we go. And he didn't like Italian cooking.
Hey.
But at least you learned it.
I did.
It's
Thank
great.
you.
Absolutely. Gene, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much, Mitchell, for having me.
God bless.
God bless.
Bye-bye. Such pleasure. Please contact us at www.abetterworld.net. Join the newsletter if you haven't done so already. Become part of a better world, because that's what this whole show is about. It's a call to a better world. Thanks again for joining us. Tune in next Monday at the same time, 6 p.m. for more, and the TV show every Tuesday night at 10:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. All of that is at www.abetterworld.net. This is Mitchell J. Rabin. I look forward to seeing you all next week.
You're listening to the